Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Q&Play, my monthly Q&A series where I answer your questions in a rambly unscripted format. Side note, minor gameplay spoilers for God of War Ragnarök. First question comes from Sellesion. It seems like you've been the DM for most of your D&D experience. Do you have any cool stories from being a player, and would you share one with us? Honestly, my experience as a player is incredibly limited. I play very rarely these days. I DM the majority of my time, and frankly, I don't see that as a curse. I love being the Dungeon Master. It is my passion, it's my drive, it's what I love to do. It's one of my great joys in life. I know that sounds kind of dorky and silly, but I mean, I do love being the DM. Even the work that comes with it, I find really enjoyable. I do love being a player, and there are player characters that I really want to play, but it can wait. It's not super urgent for me personally, just because I love DMing so much. If I'm being completely honest, the last time I played as a player was when I joined the Dice Goblins mini campaign last year. I think it was called like the 5-man heist, and I played a goblin gunslinger, which was really fun. I enjoyed the hell out of that game, but that was the last time I played, and that was a hot minute ago. I don't even think I had 10,000 subscribers back then. But I do have one fun story, and by fun, I mean it was like my first and only player character death. My rogue Althard, who was based off my first ever World of Warcraft character, he got killed by, I believe, a Dragoloth. I actually covered this in one of my first ever videos. I was responding to Ginny D's Dungeons and Dragons tag. It was like my 5th video. And I remember talking about this very briefly, but guys, it was not a big deal. It was a super chill one-shot in my old WoW guild, and none of us were taking it that seriously, if I'm being completely honest. I didn't even really understand what D&D could be as a storytelling medium at the time. Like, I didn't really care for the storytelling aspect of the game. I just saw it as like a game where a guy is doing some fun voices and we stab things in our imaginations, and we look at this weird grid on a website that I found poorly formatted. It was Roll20. Anyway, yeah, so that was my experience with D&D the first time. It was only when I started watching Dice Camera Action, I think in 2015, and then got into Critical Role, I really realized, like, oh, D&D can be used to, like, tell a story with all these characters, and as the Dungeon Master, even though I was really confused as to how it worked, I could build the story myself, and that's something that I've always wanted to do, even though I never really had a medium to really express that interest, and now I have it, and I love it. So yeah, that ended up being about way more than you asked, so there you go. Next question comes from the Puppeteer 213. I don't know how much homebrew you make, but what's your advice on making lore and mechanics for homebrew races or magic items? Any idea as to how they can fit nicely or be important to the world without it seeming like you're making players read a book of lore? They read enough books already. Totally understandable and a good question. So actually, this is really pertinent to right now because I'm actually making a bunch of legendary items for my home game, Descent into the Veil, which is coming to a close in a few months, which is still a while away, but still, I'm giving them their endgame gear, you know, their magic epic weapons, which is really exciting. And look, my players, if for some reason you're watching this, stop right here, stop it right now, please don't watch further. Anyway, yeah, for my next session, my players are going to be taking the bones of one of their enemies, Cain Miva, an avatar, a piece of Vecna himself. They're going to be taking those bones to an altar. Now, they don't understand exactly what's going to happen at this altar. They just know that one of their NPC allies plans to do some kind of ritual on the bones that will help them to harvest power to fight their enemies, because my party got their butts kicked a few sessions ago, and they're looking to not let that happen again. The players are obviously concerned about this ritual because they don't want Cain Miva, this piece of Vecna, this avatar of Vecna, to rise again because he sucked. He was the worst. So they are obviously very concerned, especially since this NPC has an unfortunate connection to this Cain Miva character. However, she has a surprise up her sleeve. She's going to take the bones, melt them down, and she's going to turn Cain Miva, the avatar of Vecna, into a sword. She's going to take his soul and his bones and make it into a sword for one of the party members, and it is going to be very epic, very exciting. What am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that one very viable and very cool way to do this is to have the story of the game be the weapon's lore. They're forging this legendary weapon, forged from a piece of Vecna himself, forged from the bones of this avatar, this puppet of the god of ambition. They're turning it into a blade to be wielded against Vecna in the future. That's epic. That's a cool story that's all playing out inside the game itself. If you want past lore to be communicated, you can communicate through a variety of ways. Exposition is a powerful tool, especially in Dungeons & Dragons, because you don't want your players to literally read. They're probably not going to read, honestly. So telling them the information is important, but telling them in a way that's exciting is more important, because oftentimes the droning on and on of exposition can be just as boring as reading a text scroll. I often use NPCs to convey this information, especially since my players like my NPCs. They like hearing them talk, they like talking to them, and having NPCs convey that information. Right now, they're in a whole new land. They have to fight against the Leviathan pirates on the Leviathan Isles with the Pirate King leading them, and I need to convey all the lore about this place, this island rich in ancient history. Tying this in with player backstory is another way to make it interesting for your players. Also, make it fun. Give it a bit of personality. The sword that I'm creating for the rogue, the sword forged of Vecna's soul, it literally has personality because this piece of Vecna is still in the sword. So basically, the sword talks. He's still in there. He just got turned into a sword. So that's going to be fun. I'm sure that's going to lead to some interesting roleplay interactions. Hell, I just thought of this right now, but that sword, because it talks and because a piece of Vecna's in there, that can be used as an interesting way to deliver exposition, especially since the actual Vecna, the big boy Vecna, is the big bad evil guy of the campaign. Using this piece of him to convey aspects of his personality can be really fun. I'm not saying that you need to do this exact thing, but understand that when you're doing exposition, multitasking is a really good idea. I managed to create a sword that is connected to the players in an important way because they've been fighting this Cain Miva guy for a while, and they're going to turn him into a sword now. It delivers on exposition, it delivers on story because they're crafting this weapon inside the game itself, and it allows for the game to have a little bit more personality because now we have an extra character in here that can deliver exposition in a new and interesting way. All those aspects are important. You don't need to do all at once, but they are all pieces of advice that you can use to make your lore a bit more interesting to convey. I need to make a whole video on this. I did it a while ago, but it was like a while ago. I think I didn't even have the rat avatar back then, so maybe it's time to revisit this topic. Thanks for the question, though. It's a good one. Question from Easiest CC. Outside the Essentials kit, which source books should I buy to diversify my monster encounters? I recently bought Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft for my D&D Vampires vs. Humans campaign, and I want to know what specific source books you would recommend. This book isn't even out yet, but it's already transformed the way I play and run D&D. Matt Colville and MCDM's Flea Mortals is a masterpiece. It's not even out yet, and it's a masterpiece. The book is incredible. It's all of Matt Colville's minion rules and action-based encounter design, all of that baked into this book that has been releasing steadily over time in these like little kits. I love it. I love it so much. My games have become 10 times more fun. If you're wondering about the minion rules and the villain actions and all those homebrew stuff that I use during Shadow over Carconos to make my encounters so epic and deadly and exciting, this is it. I love encounters that make the player sweat a little bit, especially when I'm streaming games. Like, I feel like I'm gonna bore the audience if they don't feel like there's any risk. I want there to be constantly risk. I want you guys to be on the edge of your seats, and honestly, without Flea Mortals, I don't think that would be possible. It allows me to throw tons of enemies at my players with the minion rules because every minion only has 1 hit point, but because of group attacks, they're still a little bit deadly. They're like glass cannons. I love those minion rules. They make the game way more fun at every level of play. I still use minion rules for my player characters that are at level 12 in my home game. In both my super combat-centric home game and my roleplay-centric online games, this has been a game changer for me. Each type of creature, whether it's human or kobold or orc, they all have their own traits and abilities, different classes for each that make them all unique as factions. It's just so good. All the monsters are being revamped and new ones are being added in from Matt Colville's own twisted mind. I love it. I love it so much. Again, the book is not even done yet. I can't even begin to imagine what this masterpiece is going to be like when it's done, but damn it, I am looking forward to it. If you need to buy anything, pre-order this book. It will give you access to all of the pre-release PDF so you can try it out for yourself. It is 100% worth the money. It's not even close. Like from there, honestly, I can't even recommend just normal D&D books because the normal monster manual and even the monster supplements, they don't even come close. This is the Monsters 2.0 that I've been wanting for D&D for a long time now. I just can't go back to using anything else. I now port these rules into other creatures so that I can just use them all the time. The action-based monsters, the minions, all this stuff. So good. It's so good. Please support this book because I need more stuff like this. Next question comes from Jacob Lewis. I see you have a lot of LEGO products displayed. Would you support LEGO bringing back Bionicle? I really hope that people here know what Bionicle is. I know I'm a Dungeons & Dragons channel, so I do feel like people are going to get on my ass again for talking about anything but Dungeons & Dragons. But, you know, here we go. We're going to talk about LEGO for a second, because I do love LEGO. So how do I feel about LEGO bringing back Bionicle? I don't. I'm going to be honest, guys. I do like Bionicle. I did like it when it was releasing. I had a few Bionicle sets, but at this point, all of them have been parted down. I don't have any Bionicle sets remaining. In fact, Construction in general is just not part of my display or my collection. Not that I didn't like those Construction buildable figure sets. They were great. I really liked Bionicle, but it wasn't something that was at the cornerstone of my love for LEGO, even though I did enjoy the theme. I was bummed to see it go, but I was happy that at least it got some kind of ending to its story. A lot of themes just disappear, even themes that I really love. Like, I remember really liking Ultra Agents and Space Police, and those themes just vanished into thin air, and we haven't got themes like them in years. So if Bionicle came back, I think that would be really cool, just because it would represent to me a return to LEGO's original theming, where they don't just do licensed sets. A lot of their sets right now are licensed LEGO Ideas sets or Ninjago, which is not a bad thing. I love Ninjago. I love licensed sets, but I do want LEGO to be doing some of their own original stuff more often. And Bionicle coming back, I think, would be a really cool start to that. Would I be completely ecstatic over it? Not really. Even though I like Bionicle, it's not something that I need to happen. I enjoyed it when it was happening, but now that it's gone, I've moved on. By the way, if you do like LEGO and you like Dungeons & Dragons, I did a whole section of my podcast, Tavern Adjacent, where I talked about both, which have come together recently in a LEGO Ideas competition to pick a Dungeons & Dragons LEGO set that will be released, which will be coming to shelves within the next year. So if you want to see that, then head down into the description. I'll link my podcast episode, and down there you can actually vote. There's a link to a poll on lego.com where you can vote for the official D&D LEGO set. It's really exciting. But anyway, moving on. Question from Mr. WD. What have you been watching or playing recently, and how did it inspire your games? Well, most recently, my top games have been God of War Ragnarök, Minecraft, and Geometry Dash, the last of which has not inspired my games in any way that I know of. God of War Ragnarök, on the other hand, has provided me tons of inspiration through its music. Music is how I find inspiration for Dungeons & Dragons. Music is what drives my games forward. It's always a core part of what I do as a DM, and having a brand new soundtrack to pick through is a big part of that. Obviously, the soundtrack's connection to the game is important, but just the general vibe of the soundtrack, it is what inspires me as a dungeon master. Stuff like epic boss battle themes will just inspire entire fights, and I will just come up with BBGs on top of my head just because I listened to an epic song from a great game. If you've watched my God of War Ragnarök video, you will know that I also take inspiration from the way villains are introduced and just the general way the story is structured, because oftentimes I'll find that games provide a decent basis on how to introduce stuff like baddies, because game developers are often working with similar restrictions that DMs are working with. Obviously, the two mediums are incredibly different in many different ways. Not trying to say that game development and being a dungeon master are the same thing. They're not. But oftentimes, when you're trying to introduce your bad guys, you're working under similar restrictions in terms of like plotting out the story. And that's why I often take inspiration from video games when it comes to trying to make my story be plotted out over this really long period of time. Television shows, though, provide a lot of my character inspiration. House of the Dragon has been a big part of helping me to figure out how these medieval characters, these fantasy characters, would talk, for example. I love House of the Dragon's dialogue and the way those people speak. And obviously, like, I'm not smart enough to come up with that kind of dialogue off the top of my head, but House of the Dragon does inspire some of the ways my characters, especially my more sophisticated political characters, talk. If you've watched Shadow of Carconos, you would get some of those vibes. At least I hope so. Inspiration can honestly come from anywhere. It comes from music, it comes from games, it comes from shows, it comes from film, whatever. It can come from anywhere, and oftentimes it'll come without you even knowing that it's in your head. You won't even know if you're taking inspiration from something. You'll just come up with ideas. You know what? That's just fine. All your ideas are going to come from somewhere. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I just love taking inspiration from all these different sources. I just love fantasy media. I love all of this stuff. It's a big part of my life, and incorporating it into my work, into my games, it's one of the great joys of my existence. Last question from Owen Sowders. Hey Crispy, I love how you do the horror/horrific parts of Shadow over Carconos, and I'm writing a homebrew campaign for my friends that will include horror too. What are some tips you could give when it comes to horror in D&D? My number one tip, and I think I've said this before, I've talked about horror a lot because it's really hard to pull off, but my number one tip for horror is to remember that, in my opinion, tension is very universal, especially when it comes to audio. I use audio a lot in my games in general. Music, ambience, sound effects, all those things I don't add in post. Those are part of the game. Like, the players are actually hearing all that stuff during my games, and it's a big part of those games because without that sort of horror ambiance, it's really hard for me to convey the fearful nature of the situation without it. It's a big part of my style, especially when I'm doing horror. Like that creepy buzzing sound, or like a screaming monster jump scare. Those things are really hard for me to pull off without sound effects, which is why I use them so much. In terms of storytelling, Lovecraft hit the nail on the head when he said that fear of the unknown is a powerful thing, because it really, really is. And that means keeping a few things ambiguous. I really don't like it when stories just over-explain everything and leave no mysteries up for the audience, or in this case, the players, to discover or to wonder about. Because mysteries are part of the fun of fantasy in general, and in horror, mystery is a big, big part of it. Not to say that you can't have exposition and explain things for a mystery. I remember Haunting of Hill House explained a lot about what was going on at Hill House, but they didn't explain everything. They didn't explain why there were ghosts there. They didn't explain the nature of the house itself. They just explained like the general gist of what's happening, and that was enough. Horror is just really complicated in D&D, and this is something I've definitely said before, but you need to make sure your players are willing to buy into it. If they are not willing to buy into the horror, if they're just gonna make dick jokes the entire time, it's gonna fall apart no matter what. There's just nothing you can do about it. And obviously, that's not the fault of the players, but they do need to be down for horror, and that's something for Session 0. But yeah, there is my horror advice, and there is this episode of Q&Play. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you should check out Tavern Adjacent, my new podcast. If you want to be featured on that podcast with your own horror stories, head down into the description down below where you can send me your voicemail for the chance of having me respond to whatever D&D woes you have going on. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own questions or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment All Father to reference the game I'm playing in the background, and tell me to miss the end of the video. Necessary comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.